Hello to you all. Let me ask you a question. How can we be good ancestors? This, I believe, is the great existential question of our age. It's about recognizing that although we have ancestors, we too are the ancestors of the generations to come. It's about thinking about the legacies we will leave. It's about considering how we will be remembered for what we did or did not do at this pivotal moment in the human story. It's about taking the long view, and as Renee said, building to last. So I'd like to introduce to you 4 ways of thinking about being a good ancestor. But before I go there, let me introduce you to my children. So back in 2019, at the time of the UK general election at that time, my partner and I decided to give our then 11-year-old kids an unusual birthday present. We decided to give them our votes in the election. So we all sat around the kitchen table, we discussed the party manifestos and the electoral system, and they then told us where to put the X on the ballot sheet. And in case you're wondering, they don't exactly have the same political views as their parents. Now, we did this, of course, because they have no voice in our political systems, yet our decisions as adults will affect their lives more than our very own. And this is part of a larger problem that I think of as the tyranny of the now. The way that our politicians can't see beyond the next election or the latest opinion poll. Businesses can't see beyond the quarterly report. We're looking at our phones and clicking the buy now button. And in this age of chronic short-termism, we need to recognize there are so many long-term challenges coming our way. We need to be thinking about the next pandemic that might be on the horizon, dealing with wealth inequality and racial injustice, which get passed on from generation to generation, dealing with the risks from new technologies like AI and genetic engineering, and of course, dealing with the global ecological crisis, which is right here, right now, in floods and droughts and storms, but it also has a slow violence behind it. It will get worse year on year, decade on decade. How are we going to feed 10 billion people with the prospect of massive global crop failures in the years to come? And one of the ways I think about this is that I believe that humankind, particularly those of us living in the wealthy countries of the global north, we have colonized the future. We treat the future like a distant colonial outpost, devoid of people, where we can freely dump ecological degradation and technological risk as if there was nobody there. Yet, of course, that future is full of all the millions and billions of the generations to come, but it can be quite difficult sometimes to picture them. So let me help you do that. This is an image I call the scale of unborn generations. There in the little green circle are the 8 billion of us alive today. If you go back 50,000 years, let's get long term here, almost 100 billion people have been born and died. If we go forward 50,000 years, assuming current birth rates level off and stabilize, nearly 7 trillion people will be born. So there in that giant orange circle, all your children and grandchildren, if you have them, and their grandchildren, and the communities and friends on whom they will depend. How will they remember us? And somebody who really thought about this issue was the great immunologist Jonas Salk, most famous developing the polio vaccine in the 1950s. But in later life, he said, the great question facing our civilization is this: are we being good ancestors? And he believed that if we were going to be remembered well by future generations, we would need to extend our time horizons. And instead of thinking just on the scale of seconds, minutes, and hours, we need to think on the scale of years, decades, centuries, and even beyond that. And in order to do that, how do we do that? Well, I think we need to recognize a distinction in the human brain between what I think of as the marshmallow brain and the acorn brain. The marshmallow brain is the part of our neuroanatomy which is all about short-term thinking, instant rewards, immediate gratification. Of course, named after the famous marshmallow test, where kids had the marshmallow put in front of them in the 1960s and were told if they could resist eating it for 15 minutes, they were rewarded with 2 marshmallows. And the famous finding was that most kids couldn't resist and they snatched the snack. But this is not the only story of who we are. We also have an acorn brain, which lives here in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. The acorn brain is all about long-term thinking and planning and strategizing. And there's always a struggle going on between the marshmallow and the acorn. You know, do we upgrade to the latest iPhone or plant a seed in the ground for posterity? Do we party tonight or do we save for our pensions for tomorrow? And we need to learn to switch on the acorn brain. And in fact, human beings are quite good at this. Other creatures do plan ahead a bit. So a chimpanzee might get a stick, strip off the leaves, and turn it into a tool to put into a termite hole. But they will never make a dozen of those tools and set them aside for next week. But that's what human beings do, and we need to get a lot better at it. And one way we can do it is through what I think of as cathedral thinking. The idea of embarking on long-term projects going beyond your career, maybe beyond your own lifetime, named after the medieval cathedral builders, where those who put in the first foundation stones knew that they would never see the building finished within their own lifetimes. Think of the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, started in the 1880s. It still isn't finished. And it's cathedral thinking that's allowed humankind to build the Great Wall of China and voyage into space. And one of my favorite examples of this are the sewers built in London starting in the 1850s. At that time, raw sewage was being dumped into the River Thames. Tens of thousands of people were dying of cholera and other diseases each year. But in 1858, in the long, hot summer of that year, the smell, the stink, it was known as the Great Stink. The smell was so bad that even members of Parliament in the Palace of Westminster on the river couldn't breathe. And that's when they passed the emergency legislation to build the sewers. And the thing is this, they built the sewers twice as big as they needed to be for the population at the time. And they used very expensive bricks and cement. And that's why those sewers are still in use today, more than a century later. It's a brilliant example of cathedral thinking. You might even think of it as sewer thinking. And we need more of that. And there are many great examples of it around today. One of them, for example, is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, collecting millions of seeds in an indestructible rock bunker in the Arctic Circle that's designed to last for 1,000 years. It's a kind of botanical Noah's Ark. Or think about the Greenbelt movement started in Kenya by the great Wangari Maathai in the late 1970s, designed to restore Kenya's ecology. Tens of millions of trees have been planted there in the decades since. More than 30,000 women have been trained in agroforestry skills. So my question to you now is this really, is that what is your cathedral thinking project? You know, what's not just your 1-year plan or your 10-year plan, but your 100-year plan? Let me now turn to a second way to be a good ancestor, developing a legacy mindset. Now, of course, with our legacies, we want to think about, the skills and the culinary skills, let's say, that we might pass on to future generations, or the recipes, the 1,000-year-old strudel recipe we might pass on to future generations. But what about also passing on a livable planet?